everyone. I hope you all are having a great day. Indian startup ecosystem in all its adversity while tackling numerous challenges head on is innovating faster than ever. The pandemic has given tailwinds to multiple sectors like edtech, health tech, fintech, leading to a new wave of digitization across India. Now more than ever, it is imperative to understand what the future looks like for India's startup economy and where the next wave of growth will come from. On this note, in association with Microsoft India, we bring to you The Dialogue, a four-episode mini-series to help you decode these new opportunities and the role of technology. Today, we are having a dialogue on fintech for India's next billion. India has more than 3,000 plus fintech startups. Over $10.3 billion have been invested across 692 deals between 2014 and H1 2020, that is June 2020. There are five fintech unicorns in India. UPI has recorded over 1.6 billion transactions worth INR 2.98 lakh crores in August 2020. This brings to our topic for today, fintech for India's next billion, empowering digital transformation of India's SMBs. I would like to welcome my speakers and I would like to invite Dina Jacob, co-founder and CFO, Open Bank. Open Bank is a fintech startup which offers a new banking service for SMEs and startups. The company has raised more than 38 million US dollars from Tiger Global, AngelList, 314, BNext, amongst others. Welcome, Dina. Next, I would like to welcome Siddharth Pai. Siddharth is a founding partner at 314 Capital, an early stage venture capital fund. The firm, which manages assets under management worth $210 million, has just announced the launch of Fund 3 with a corpus size of $100 million. 314 counts companies such as Licious, Open, Better Place, Darwinbox, Faircent, amongst others, as part of its portfolio. Welcome, Siddharth, and congratulations for the Fund 3.
Thank you so much, Vaibhav.
Next, I would like to welcome Vijayant. Vijayant is a country leader, BFSI at Microsoft India. Known for building high-performance sales, pre-sales, inside sales, and marketing teams, and for creating new market initiatives for the business, Vijayant comes with over 25 years of experience. Welcome, Vijayant.
Thanks.
And last, I would like to welcome Gaurav, co-founder and CBO, Karza Technologies. The startup was founded in 2015. The company, which helps financial institutes in making smarter lending decisions, addressing critical issues such as NPAs and loan frauds, has over 200 plus clients and is backed by investors such as Rajan Anandan, Artha Ventures, Singularity Ventures, amongst others. So welcome, guys. Welcome to the show. And before I start, I would like to thank you all taking time, especially in post-pre-COVID transition, what we are trying to do. And Siddharth, starting with you, if you can help us with the landscape of the fintech ecosystem in India, very, very broad landscape, very briefly, before we go in depth, and what the business models you guys see as investors and how you evaluate businesses when it comes to fintech, and then we can go in depth.
Sure, happy to. So I think, India's more or less cemented its place as actually the fintech capital, as more or less the fintech capital of the entire world. And this has been a combination. Primarily, fintech has always been driven either by the incumbents or it's been driven primarily by disruptors. India is unique in the case that a large amount of our fintech innovations has been driven primarily by government. All this started off with the launch of UPI itself, which is the money payment protocol where I can transfer money from one bank account to any other bank account in the entire nation within a short span of time and essentially for free. In fact, if you've actually seen PayPal and all were actually created on the basis of the fact that it was impossible to transfer money from one account to another in the US at least. So India's managed to leapfrog that entire bit. And if you actually study COVID as a whole, the reason why India could actually navigate COVID and commerce could still actually continue during this time is because almost every single person, every single family in the country has a bank account. Everyone has UPI, and payments essentially became a lot easier. Now we've seen certain challenges come up with regard to lower MDR, etc. But I think this became the sort of starting block for fintech. So the first generation of fintech companies in India primarily worked around the payment space itself. And after this, what we've seen evolve to a very large extent is fintech in terms of lending. And we have actually seen a number of fintech lending companies also come up where they've seen that what are the gaps in the market that do exist. And if you've noticed, as you've been tracking the Indian startup ecosystem, they've actually absorbed the largest amount of capital as a sector in India over the past 2 to 3 years. Of course, now Jio has become a separate category in itself, and they've absorbed the largest amount of capital across. I think when you combine all the other sectors combined, but that's actually a separate story. So fintech lending has actually come up to a large extent, and now what we're seeing happen is actually insurance companies also coming into the fray when it comes to this. The stockbroking apps such as Zerodha actually saw the highest number of people actually entering into the market and opening demat accounts through them during this particular time. And we've also seen the mutual fund Sahi Hai campaign actually evolve into the growth of Small Case, Scriptbox, Grow, and a number of these other startups coming in as well. And as India actually starts working, blockchain is also making its way into the fintech ecosystem. And what is that interplay going to be? Because SBI has already announced a launch of blockchain as well about 12 months ago. And how's that going to evolve? How's it going to evolve out in time is going to be anyone's guess. And along with this, as all this churn is happening, we've seen the emergence of the new umbrella entity by this one, RBI. By RBI saying anybody can actually create the NPCI, provided they have a 500 crore net worth and certain other criteria they've actually put into the mix. We're seeing UPI going international right now, which is going to be India's more or less MasterCard or Visa moment, depending on how the government actually works with private players and startups, especially as ambassadors, to actually carry this forward to a large extent as well. And along with this, what we're also seeing emerging as a technology is actually neobanks. We've seen how the traditional banking infrastructure in the country has actually hit several breaking points, especially now with the loan moratorium and the ambiguity around that as well. What we're seeing emerge is actually the emergence of neobanks. And in India especially getting a banking license has traditionally been hard. We had a very few number of banks compared to the population size as well. And that's how we see neobanking actually emerge, where they leverage the existing banking infrastructure and they also make the entire process and their protocols much more palatable to the end consumer. And we of course have several people in the neobanking space for SMEs, especially businesses, as well as for individuals as well. And these are how the adjacencies are actually coming up. And along with this, there are green shoots in terms of fintech, in terms of a number of other adjacencies. We've seen healthcare insurance come to the forefront as of now as well. And how can we actually what are fintech coming in there? The pay later model is also being championed by several other people. And what I actually see emerging is almost every single company, the way they used to say we're a .com business because you have a website in 1999. In 2019 and 2020 onwards, every single company is actually going to have a fintech play themselves. So fintech is no longer going to be a vertical in itself. It will be the horizontal for which every single company, every single startup, especially in India, will actually have to navigate. So this is how the investors are seeing the fintech opportunity in India. This is how some of the startups are seeing the fintech opportunity in India as well. And with this, I would actually like to conclude my opening statement.
Sure. And before I come to Dina and Gaurav, Vijayant, from a corporate perspective, from a Microsoft perspective, what has been your observations over past 2-3 months in general, and when we talk about fintech startups in particular, or fintech in particular?
Thanks, Vaibhav, and thanks, Siddharth, for the opening comments. Like what we've probably seen happening in the past 3-4 months. It's been a tough period for everybody. There's been, most of our FSI customers, our financial services customers, banks have been adjusting to this period. But we've also seen a massive amount of acceleration in digitization and digital in general. We found a lot of innovation happening within FSI customers in terms of trying to make methods to reach out to their end user base, in terms of trying to provide secure communication tools to all our banking financial customers through Microsoft Teams, etc. But that apart, we've also seen a lot of our fintech partners, our startup partners, stepping up here. They've actually been collaborating with the mainstream FSI organizations which we work with to come out with very innovative solutions. Solutions, for example, for workplace management in times like this, where an X percentage of people can go and work currently in offices, etc. You have startups who are working with mainstream banks today and actually providing those solutions where they can actually do all those things. Similarly, there's a whole amount of customer engagement solutions which are coming to the fore from various startups working with mainstream banks and financial institutions. Again, with an idea that contactless sales and service can continue. So all in all, and this is what we're hearing from all our customers is there is a massive infusion of digital. There is a lot of innovation happening there. Obviously, some just to take care of the needs today, but some which will stay. And so we do expect that a lot of work from home, work from anywhere sort of concepts will continue, even after we are through with this unfortunate period. So there is those aspects which are going to become permanent as well from a technology standpoint. So all in all, we're seeing a lot of technology getting in there. We're seeing a lot of innovation, being created, and we expect that the fintechs and startup community is really going to also sort of in some cases repivot the way they were looking at things, considering what's happening now, and come out with offerings which will really make an impact.
Sure. And Gaurav and Dina, I would like to put an open question, and I would. It's not a question. It's just a statement, or rather 2 word SME lending, right? And that's the cue, because there's so much going on in that space. Good, bad, improving. What are your takes, your readings on SME lending, especially government's policies in past few months? There's always 2 sides of the coin. So starting with you, Dina, what's your take? What's your observation? And then Gaurav, will bring you in.
So, interestingly, in the SME lending side of it, what we have seen historically is that SME has been a segment which was pretty much struggling to get access to capital. The key
Yeah.
reason was that obviously, they had the limitation of not having collaterals which they can show to the extent that bigger companies can. And second, also is when it comes to the working capital requirements and bridging that requirement, which is the biggest in terms of when you are running an SME business, it's difficult. They have been doing business in a very, very cash based manner, and also in terms of collections as well as the payout happens in multiple systems. In fact, it could be on check, it could be cash, it could be partly on payment gateways. So digitization is very, very less there. So what used to happen was that there is absolutely the traditional methods of digital and credit positioning has not been supporting them in terms of getting access to capital. So that has always been an issue. And more to do with in the last 5 to 6 months, what we have seen is we have seen the entire credit decisioning part crumbling, especially for this segment which was already struggling with this problem. So that is where I think, especially coming to the pandemic part of it, it has been acting as a trigger for us to relook and revamp the entire way in which SME lending has been happening in the country. And we've seen a
Sure.
lot of changes happening right from the lenders to the new models which are coming up in terms of decisioning, moving more and more towards a cash flow lending, cash flow based lending, which we have been talking for a long time, but because of the infrastructural issues and the speed at which we were making the pace at which it was happening, propelling towards that has been a little slow. That has really accelerated during this time.
Sure. But Gaurav and Dina and said you can come in, post once Gaurav gives the comments. When we talk about SME lending, we are hearing so many things, right? SMEs want money, but banks are maybe not enabled to lend them money. But a lot of startups have not got banking license, as we talked about. So Gaurav, how do you connect the dots, and how do you see next 1 year panning out if we talk about SME lending or lending at large?
Sure. Okay. So overall, I would say COVID has obviously been a very good awakening call for majority of the institutions in the entire ecosystem, right? Whether it be origination or aggregators, whether it be the overall underwriting process and the manner in which data was construed or accepted. And right till the dispersal. So when you have to look at it as a larger category, there is no shortage of demand, right? There is only a supply constraint that's happened, which is primarily being fueled by both fear as well as a downstream misunderstanding as to what a moratorium meant. Now, which is where luckily what we have also seen is that banks are currently pushing for giving, say, the MSME loans or SME loans first to the categories of the customers that are already banking with them. For NBFCs, again, it's based on CRM based lending that they are all preferring and not exactly opening up doors for anyone in the system. One other drastic change that has happened over the last 5 months is that you can say that work for digitized content by virtue of data to enable decisions has obviously gone up big time. We saw 1/3 of our lifetime clients being closed in the last 5 months itself, right? So it's been a busy time for us. But yes, I would say definitely the banks have understood that digital is not a luxury or another vertical to have along the entire ecosystem, but the fact that it has to be embedded within each and every vertical that currently is the support pillar for them to function at large. So yes, I would definitely agree with what Vijayant had mentioned that yes, there has been a stellar change in terms of the way people have been looking at digital and are currently in the process of overhauling the systems. But personally speaking, I don't see the end result to actually materialize up until the end of December because this does involve literally you changing or your entire origination or your decisioning systems or integrating external APIs, whether it be the entire OSIN network that couldn't have had a better timing or video KYC that again was supported through RBI at the right time. So I would say regulatory wise, there have been positive changes and I would say the timing could have been either coincidence or really well thought. But yes, I would say adoption is something that is happening slow and steady.
Sure. And we talked about cash flow based financing, asset based financing, and app based financing. So Siddharth, what's your take on the shifting paradigm, from old traditional banking ways to the new breed which is coming in?
Sure, happy to. So I think first and foremost, it must be noted that the finance minister also in various budgets has actually spoken about app-based financing and spoken about cash flow-based financing as well. Now, see, the traditional model of banking has always been, I actually need collateral for whatever loan I'm giving you. The collateral needs to be at least 110 or 120% to cover the loan that I'm actually giving. Now, in that case, the question to actually ask, and this has traditionally been a huge issue for India, because if you actually studied any major civilization, the first collateral anyone actually had was land. And because India has gone through multiple upheavals, our title to land itself is something most people haven't been able to leverage, which is why we've seen farmers also, in spite of owning their particular land, are unable to actually secure loans or proper financing against that. And we're sort of stuck in that particular rut. That's why it's important for India to also notice the shift to cash flow based lending. So what do you mean by cash flow based lending? If you actually look at it, we're actually looking at the activity of the particular startup as opposed to the assets. Now, the asset-based model that's traditionally been there, that banks have been comfortable with, have actually led to the proliferation of non-performing assets in India, especially. If you actually look at the NPA register, a number of them have been traditional businesses who've actually collateralized either their land, large infrastructure projects, real estate development projects, or they've actually even the power plants, ultra mega power plants, etc. Now, the moment that happens, the thought process behind the bank was, look, even if the loan actually goes south for whatever reason, I can actually liquidate this particular collateral and then I can actually get that back. Now, the question to ask is, where is a deep level of competency within the entire nation for someone to actually take over a stalled real estate project or a large ultra mega power plant in order for them to make those particular loans? So all the banks went chasing these large loans. Those large loans have actually ballooned into the NPAs we have now and the entire issue that was there. Because if you even recollect, just prior to COVID, we had the IL&FS crisis in 2018 and fintech companies have been hit badly by that. Then we've actually seen what happened to Dewan Housing, Reliance Capital, Yes Bank going down also was a major hit over there as well. So it's been slap after slap after slap for these fintech companies. I think the regulators now have already woken up to say, look, as a country, we don't actually need really large loans going to a very small set of people. We need smaller number of loans actually going to a wider number of people, which is how the entire narrative has actually changed towards cash flow based lending. Because what does cash flow based lending look? It actually looks at the bank statement, analyzes from where you're actually receiving money from your customers, where that money is actually being spent. So your interest, and they also need to see whether your revenue is stable enough to actually cover the interest, that actually comes in. And the moment they can actually ascertain that, they can actually start off by actually giving you a small loan and building up your credit history over time. Because the initial moat is so large, it becomes impossible for people to even get access to credit. And this is in spite of MSMEs and SMEs being considered as priority sector lending for a long period of time. That hasn't done much for them. The NPA issue still exists. This is why I'm actually very bullish on neobanks, especially. I'd love to hear from Dina, Gaurav, and from Vijayant as well, because all of them are working on the convergence now of essentially cash flow based lending, creating the metrics that a bank actually requires to sort of utilize this, creating the tools that SMEs can actually leverage to make sure that their old Khata version of accounting, which essentially have a ledger or they use some of the offline tools, can actually migrate online. It can actually become part of this entire digitalization wave. Because unless this happens, whatever the recovery for India is going to be very low, because we're a land of SMEs. Our largest companies are listed. Our stock market consists, I think, about 5,000, 6,000 odd companies. Yet there are about 5 to 6 crore businesses in the entire nation in various forms, sole proprietors, partnerships, etc. All these companies need access to formal credit. All these entities need to be more resilient. And the only way to do that is to actually leverage the cash flow that actually happens, because all these companies are solvent. They may not have assets because a large amount of profits have either been taken out of the particular business, or they've been invested in somewhere. So that lack of assets should not actually preclude them from actually reaching this particular part. And since India is serious about financial inclusion, startups are going to be the best enablers for this. And the moment they work with larger giants such as Microsoft and others to actually get this entire part, that's the only way we as a nation can actually arise. And cash flow based lending, it's been a vision of the government for quite some time, can actually come to reality. In fact, that can actually become the UPI moment for India's SMEs, if you actually look at it.
So you have already given us a couple of very good marketing lines: UPI movement of India, Mastercard be the movement of India, which we'll use later for sure. But and you're right. And moving exactly, before we touch UPI and Dina, especially from a neo banking perspective, right? What are you as a neo bank? What are you guys looking at the future, right? What do you think where the next trends are going to come? Next opportunity is going to come? It is just lending to SMEs and figuring out, the default rate is very low, as layman as I can put it out there. Or is it more to it? And what is the opportunity there where a lot of startups can still build upon?
So it's about, let's go back to the fundamentals of why a neobank in the first place, right? So initially, as we mentioned, it's all boils down to what cash flow a business sits on at the end of the day, and even for personally for that matter, right? So what is today happening is that because of the limitations in terms of aggregating your data and looking at what exactly happened in your business, both in terms of inflow or outflow as you speak, it's extremely difficult to put together different payment systems. So it's all about, moment of truth is where your money has gone out or come in and for what purpose, right? So put that together. Since we are a kind of nation wherein multiple ways of payment modes are happening in banking end to end, it all happens in silos today. So this is what the challenge happens for business or for people for that matter, consumers for that matter, right? So this is where neobanks come into picture in terms of bridging the gap between what exactly happens on your, whether you receive in cash, whether you receive as a check, whether you receive from 100 people and you are not able to identify and reconcile. This is where neobanks come into picture, taking care of the entire customer cash flow grip part of it. So we enable the businesses to have a complete integrated payment mechanism, end-to-end banking on the same platform, connected to automated bookkeeping, which happens in the back end. Because if you are able to get a grip on what is happening on your cash flow, it is easy for you to record, get MIS out of that, and even to tell, this is extremely critical for any entrepreneur to take a business decision on that, right? And the same goes with anybody else who is consuming this data also. And even compliance we enable on the platform, apart from, of course, the growth tools which we help the businesses to have on the same platform. So it is a completely integrated platform with the payments part of it. And then we have the recording, reporting, compliance part of it, and the growth tool enabled. So it's a connected commerce which happens on the same platform. The result of which is that, there are multiple places wherein we use this data. It could be compliance, it could be for lending, it could also, you could have only two ways in which you can end up in your cash flow, right? One, you have a surplus or you have a deficit. So when you have a surplus, you can actually, put the cash to good use, which is a wealth management part of it. And when you have a deficit, you should have the right sources to get the right kind of, rightly priced capital. So that is the other portion which we do. So in all of these, you need to have a prediction and a decisioning happening. And that's the reason why the power of a single platform wherein, people, you can look at what's happening to your cash flow and then take a decision. So that's going to be the trend going forward in terms of, the prediction on what your business transactions are going to be, what your cash flow is going to be, and what kind of decisions you can, assisted decisions in terms of how to put it to good use, as well as for your growth, from where you can get the right capital. And in between the decisioning part, how you can leverage it.
So we definitely need more better and more smart precision and decision algorithms of sorts going forward, in form of new banks or otherwise, right?
That's right. So the fundamental is data aggregation on one platform, in the sense, you need to have access to the entire data, thread running between all of this. Today, it's all in disjoint systems, and then have the layer of decisioning and the models attached to it.
And Vijayant, as per your understanding and your conversations with SMEs out there, especially, what do you think is their level of awareness for such solutions? Are they very open? Are they still, not very up to adopting these solutions?
I think when Dina actually made a very pertinent point there. It's eventually all now about data, right? I mean, if you look at even for the SMEs, etc., I think there is a larger awareness in terms of what they need to do, how quickly they have to adopt to different technologies and platforms. I think the good thing is you now have more sort of coherent platforms available. The SME doesn't have to recreate everything on its own. There are those pieces which are already aligned either with existing players who are there, say in the banking infrastructure in that business, or even in the startups. So I mean, the fact is, I think SMEs are getting smarter about this. You are getting bigger players who are bringing these offerings at scale to the SMEs as well. So I mean, you would have, thanks to the telecom network which has been created here, across India, the whole the bandwidth and the broadband networks which are in play. I think SMEs now have access to probably the latest technologies available, and in a way which it's sort of pay as you go. So you really don't have to invest heavily as well, right? So there is that advantage of technology being available at affordable rates for them to consume, and so I think that's something which is not lost on the SMEs. We'll probably see that acceleration. I think it's also a question on the supply and demand side, and that coming together to really make them accelerate. But there'll probably be something which will evolve over a period of time.
Sure. And Gaurav, you work with NBFCs, banks, and financial institutions on fraud detection and bunch of things, right? So, what is the pattern you are seeing evolving, right? Are one is Indian, I would not call it financial institutions, but slightly mid-sized businesses okay to pay for such solutions? Is one question I want to address. And second, how fast are they adopting / leaning in to get these kind of solutions?
I can actually answer that with a very concrete statistic, right? So up until say February 2020, typically number of documents where we would not find a record or it would be a mismatch to the name that we were given by the client was typically between 4 to 5%, which is still pretty high. In April and May, these numbers shot up to 13 and 17%, right? So that
Wow.
shows that the kind of people that are desperate for money and that immediate shortfall that they needed, for them, it was about trying to grab whatever resource that they could by any means necessary. Desperation does lead into fraud or innovation in this specific scenario, both. What we have seen, obviously, is that luckily or unluckily, you can say that all of the financial institutions had already walled up and placed guards that, okay, we do not want to lend in these kind of desperate times. They had already reassessed sectors to where they want to lend, don't want to lend at, or not even touch it with a 12-foot pole. So that is where luckily we have, because of these numbers itself, right? The financial institutions are now more cognizant about the fraud checks that are pertinent, as well as available in the market for them to be able to plug and play into any kind of an existing system or literally bring in a new system altogether. We've seen clients who were typically, I mean, I have been personally chasing since the past 2 years who are now chasing us that, okay, hey, I need this live commercials, please integrate. And the good part is that
Yep.
because this is still low, this has given them an ample amount of bandwidth for integration or essentially changes in the system. And there is nothing like resistance to change anymore, right? It is essentially adaptation that, or rather, evolving with the changing times, because people have understood that this scene is not going anywhere. This is sadly enough the new normal. And yeah, I've seen people being able to overcome as well as adopt quite rapidly to the specific means that are available overall in the entire startup fraternity or otherwise.
Interesting. And of course we all use, Swiggy's of the world, Zomato's of the world, and we use UPI and bunch of payment systems to pay out. And UPI is, some 28 lakh crore worth of transactions in August. So of course it is increasing day by day. But with this MDR coming in and banks kind of charging the fees on UPI transactions and UPI trying to go global. So bunch of things happening in this space. And from all of you, if we can kind of get an idea how you guys are looking at UPI as one of the important tools and how it is going to evolve and the opportunities for startups to build in this domain. Siddharth, if you can kind of send the context for us, and then we can go in.
No, sure, happy to. So see, the way UPI, if you actually look at it, UPI would have actually been its own startup. It would have been like India's PayPal or something in case the government actually hadn't stepped in, right? And there's also debate about what role does government actually have when it comes to business. That's an entirely separate part. But I think the way Indian entrepreneurs are actually, and the way Indian investors look at UPI essentially becomes the fundamental rails upon which a number of business models can actually be built on top of that. And now with the internationalization of UPI, I think this can actually become one of the greatest exports that India can actually give. India's given the world Satyagraha, India's given the world Zero, India's now actually giving the world UPI. And especially when you actually think from a perspective of financial inclusion, a number of countries in the world can actually benefit from this because for them the cost of transaction is so high. The moment somebody UPI comes, actually reduces that. Now the way the opportunity exists for Indian startups are actually abound. The same protocols, the same players we have in India can actually start internationalizing their entire offerings and all as well. So they can actually piggyback upon the UPI movement and actually become evangelists around. We've already seen Paytm made very huge inroads when it comes to Japan as well, and Paytm QR codes being utilized in Japan also. How would Paytm actually utilize that? Similarly, when it comes to other geographies, even within the Indian subcontinent itself, the chances are actually completely abound. And the innovation that we actually seen happen in UPI, building upon UPI, is something we actually haven't seen happen anywhere else in the world. And these are the opportunities. And see, the thing is, UPI actually works with regard to payment between individuals. Where is a UPI that's actually going to come for businesses? That's an entirely new protocol. That's a new way of actually doing that to make sure you have 24-hour access. And even when it comes to recurring payments and everything, because a number of companies actually are looking at workarounds as of now just to make sure they get the same benefit of UPI when it comes to it. It leads to very interesting opportunities and adjacencies for larger companies as well as startups to actually collaborate together and even have some of these people on this panel itself. So love to see what future collaborations can actually occur from this as well. So these are the sort of opportunities that actually exist when it comes to the UPI one payment protocol. Now, along with that, if we actually look at it, some of the software and everything that's being built in India, especially in the neo-banking space and connecting SMEs as well, the same kind of protocols and the same kind of process can actually be exported to the rest of the world, because the need for digitalization isn't only in India, but India is one of the only countries in the world where the abundance of talent, the large amount of capital is also coming in as of now, and the entire sort of playground being built, especially now, can actually become the template for the rest of the world. Because we've heard that old saying, while Silicon Valley can build for the first 1 billion internet users, it's only going to be India and that's built for the remaining 6 billion. And the protocols and the companies that,
Sorry, just to interrupt. What about the debate around the transaction fees or the MDR or these kind of things? Or you think it's an evolving process, and anyways we have to tackle these when we go ahead?
I think the MDR reduction is something that that the entire industry is acknowledged as a whole that the government should actually get involved in. There is, even though the cost to the consumer is actually zero, it doesn't mean the cost is actually zero throughout the entire ecosystem. There is a marginal cost that's actually going to come as part of that, and unless people actually get that marginal cost, this digital public good of UPI can actually suffer the same way in terms of tragedy of the commons. No one's actually going to look after the infrastructure. No one's going to build upon it. No one's going to upgrade it. Then in that case, we may actually lose this huge asset. I do believe it's important for the government that this MDR be a temporary measure, and this temporary measure actually be removed, so that the economic incentives to actually iterate and build upon this actually do come back. If you notice, in spite of the MDR going to zero, a number of fintech startups, especially in the payment space, are constantly evolving over time. We have seen some amount of consolidation, and now they're actually going from strength to strength, especially on the basis of transactions alone. So, and the MDR issue won't be an issue when they actually internationalize this, because the ambit of RBI is going to be primarily within scope of India, and MDR will become a commercial consideration that the various players and those governments, wherever UPI goes, can actually negotiate between themselves. So similarly, what we've seen happen in India from 2015 to 2020, this is a similar kind of situation that's going to happen across all these other countries as time goes by. And it's important for the playbook that's been created in India and the best learning from this to actually be leveraged when they do actually internationalize. And we even see champions such as, we see Indian champions also take this forward, and we see larger tech companies in India as well as global tech companies partner with Indian startups so they can actually have a two-step approach as they actually go into Southeast Asia, Middle East, North America, LATAM, and all these other geographies as well.
Sure, and data is a very, very big play, and we'll come to that. And data sharing with the new data bill coming in, and I'm sure Siddharth, we have very vocal opinions on that. So, but before we come to that, what are your views, Gaurav and Dina, on the UPI and the opportunity it has there? What do you think we can create in the SME space or in the fraud detection space when it comes to UPI as a technology?
Sure. So something that Dina would definitely be able to relate to, right, is that a component of processing in SME, which is essentially always in the shadow, is the cash component. How much expense is this person making in cash versus how much are they making in actual digital economy? So that is where I would say UPI or any other payment initiative led by the government largely is sort of helping bring that up on the forefront, right? Even if you look at the numbers, say for example, the AEPS transactions are more than doubled from March to June itself. Similarly for BBPS and so on and so forth. So automatically, I would say there is going to become a transitionary shift, more so from just meager adoption to now forceful adoption, and that is sort of going to help eliminate a assumption-based protocol that say whether it be fraud, right? As you mentioned that I would declare that I'm making 1 crore a month, say XYZ in cash vis-a-vis this much in as per my bills. So that sort of gets eliminated, whereas with cash flow lending coming into play, a large reliance would definitely be placed more on the digital receipts and the payments done vis-a-vis here. So that would be
sure. Sure, Dina.
So from our perspective, I think from a SME and a neo-banking perspective, what is very helpful is that UPI as a payment mode, the productization you can do on that. So for this ensures that the wide majority, especially on the retail side, and for the people who are spread across India, those who are not so savvy with any other kind of net banking transactions or anything else that they are not so savvy with, right? this is made democratized literally. And that's where, from the grassroots level, you're able to get all of those. I mean, especially bringing a powerful product to them, as Gaurav also just mentioned right now, in terms of giving a replacement for a cash for that matter. This is the first mode they will start with, and then the rest of the digitization part of it, right? So when we're giving them a user experience, or rather an interface which they can easily use in terms of digitized collection as well as payment, this is working out to be an excellent opportunity. And that's where once money passes through that, it's easy for us to record in the back end again. I mean, they don't have to put an extra effort. Who doesn't know what it means to record a collection, or what it means to record whom I have paid and what I have paid? All of that gets into the system automatically. So I think this is a huge method of financial, in the entire financial inclusion, and especially for the SMEs to go to digital. This has been a stepping stone, and it is also going to be like it has actually fueled the entire digitization for the wider India. In fact, I mean, true to the next billion that we are talking about, fintech for the next billion.
Sure.
And
And go ahead.
the international angle is another pretty interesting thing that is coming up and coming to the NUE as well. Pretty
Sure.
exciting to see how it unfolds.
And the core we talked about a while back is data, right? And when we say data, it's an open question to everyone. With this new data bill coming in, and the government stance on data, sharing of data, with the relevant entities, and personal identifiers being something, and non-personal identifiers being something, and a lot of debate going on this, right? So open question: how do you guys look at data being transferable from a shareable perspective, from sharing it to government perspective, and privacy coming into that whole picture? So how do you think this data is going to pan out? And Microsoft has a huge stance on data in general, right, being data at its core. So Vijant, if we can start from you on the data, on this data thought process the government is bringing in, and founders are looking at.
No, I think privacy and those aspects are extremely important. As we scale into different things, and we're getting at different levels now in terms of scale of what we're doing. UPI was just talked about, right? I mean, just the amount of data which is moving around, and financial data information. So privacy becomes a huge aspect here. And from a regulatory standpoint, we all are a part of a regulated industry in terms of banking, finance, etc. Very crucial that those aspects are taken care of. But the good thing is that technology exists to ensure that your data is sort of is kept in a secure place. Already the public cloud as a debate, right? I mean, there was a huge debate a few years ago. It's still ongoing in some places, but it is being accepted massively, right? The whole aspect of having your data, say, on a Microsoft Azure cloud or a public cloud, even for financial institutions, was a massive thing. But then now that they've actually seen how that works, what kind of safeguards are available, what kind of security products are deployed. And if you are trying to operate at a certain scale, that's possibly the only way you can do that, is you have somebody running that grid for you in a secure manner, which allows you to focus on your business. So I think privacy remains a massive issue. It's important that it is addressed. But the good part is technology exists today. The AI, ML engines which you have, algorithms which you have, are aiding in a massive way in terms of classifying data and ensuring that those aspects are taken care of. So I would think that it's a healthy debate, but it is something which from a technology standpoint we're not behind. We have technologies which can help secure data and ensure that we can transact safely.
So that personal data protection bill, you have been.
No, of course. I think this has
championing
been. I think every time we've actually spoken, you've always brought up this particular point. So look, see, the thing is, I think one of the important things to also appreciate from the data privacy perspective is that the new data is essentially now being considered by governments as part of the sovereign right. What do you actually mean by that is similarly the way we actually protect our borders, all countries are actually going to protect that data. I think this is a new norm that's actually going to emerge as of now, because if we think about it, for the longest period of time, the largest amount of the world's data was actually housed in the US under US servers, but all of us are technically considered illegal aliens. We could not actually go to the courts and these particular jurisdictions and demand that our data actually be removed or our data actually be hashed. They could do whatever they want, whatever they could with their particular data, purely in the hands of private players. So I think the world's, and similarly after this, what we've seen happen is China has enacted similar laws, and now China is actually following the same model as the US, and they're actually making sure the data gets centralized within their own borders, so to speak. So I think it's an emergent phenomenon across the entire world right now. And India has also thrown its hat into the ring to say that the data of Indians need to actually remain within India. And we've actually seen, especially in the financial services space, given the number of non-Indian entities that we actually interact with on a financial basis. Let's look at Visa, MasterCard, etc. It's become a huge issue. And the RBI has taken a very trenchant position on this particular point. And the government's also come up with the Personal Data Protection Bill. And there's numerous debate already going on that, so I don't want to add more fuel to that particular fire. But I think one of the things everyone also needs to look at is the fact that, look, there are commercial considerations that actually go into that particular data. As long as that data can be masked, the data doesn't personally identify you. The use of that particular data and the monetization of that is something that the world's actually debating it with as of now. Because you think about it, as Vijayant also mentioned, all the machine learning and AI algorithms are actually run on our data. And those are actually being used to sell services back to us. What is the monetization or what is the economic inducement that we actually have for the monetization of our data, right? It's the same as what happened to indigenous IP and all way back, where people would actually come, they would actually take all your cures and all from here, create products around that and actually sell that across the world. We've seen this happen with aspirin, we've seen it happen with quinine, we've seen this happen with a number of traditional medicines as well. So I think in this particular point in time, the data debate is not going to go away any point in time. We are going to see numerous other countries. Europe, of course, has GDPR that's actually evolved. We've seen China do similar things. Australia's coming up with its own protocols as of now. Japan's also thrown its hat in the ring. This is going to be an emergent phenomenon, and unless the world governments actually agree on the data protocols that can actually transfer data and how that actually happens, it's essentially going to be an intellectual exercise. But what's going to be important from an operational or commercial standpoint for all startups is, number one, they also respect the laws of the land as well that they operate within. It's no longer, that's going to be cognizant, that's going to be imperative for all of them, because as we've seen national governments become more protectionist in this particular regard. The moment you believe you're being disruptive by actually disregarding the laws of the land, those days are unfortunately over right now, especially when it comes to the data protection. It's important for you to be compliant on these particular aspects as well. And more importantly than that, Vaibhav, I think this is more or less something that all startups need to also understand, is that the reason why these laws actually evolve in this particular fashion is because none of the startups or none of the players actually go to the government and actually make submissions. A lot of people actually mistake Twitter or mistake social media for actually interaction with the government, right? I mean, governments are active on social media, that's true. That doesn't mean they actually enact policies based on what that happens. There's a lot more careful deliberation that happens. And Indian startups especially have showed a studied reluctance to actually engage with the regulators, engage with the government, and let their voices be known in those particular forums. So unless we see that maturity evolve in the ecosystem, we are going to start seeing policies that we don't fully understand the rationale behind, that we will actually end up contesting. It's important to actually be part of those particular forums, be part of those particular conclaves when these things are being debated, and work with the government on this. Because see, the government actually represents the people at the end of the day. If their policies don't actually reflect the people, it's because the people haven't actually made their voices known on that particular part. It's a two-way street. Whereas most people actually content going on Twitter, retweeting, and actually putting it out over there and believe that actually translate to action. Twitter is not reality. Social media is not reality. No matter they say what people actually say. And there are already existing protocols, there are existing frameworks for this. You need to navigate those frameworks and make your voices heard.
Basically, no, and see the way I'm reading about it, and so one of the thing I'm trying to understand, the division of personal identification, identifiers, and non-personal identifiers, the line is very thin. And now they are saying the sharing of data to a common body, which can further share it with corporate/startups, right? So Gaurav and Dina, right? Will you be okay to share your data, your customer data, your financial data for a common use, creating a common platform and where your competitors can leverage that data to build upon? So that is the debate which is somewhere going on at large. And what are your thoughts on that, if you guys had time to go through the whole thing?
Sure. So personally, obviously, I deeply read the data privacy bill, right? Because it does have a direct impact on our business. What I've understood that the one element which is slightly different from the other geographies is essentially data collection. Data processing, of course, should have the explicit consent of the person whose data it is being processed as, right? However, one of the core fundamental shifts that we will see on the economy, as well as not just startups, but even larger players, just to give you perspective, say you have one of the largest NBFCs today in the country, which run its 90% of its loan book based upon pre-approved loans. They identify, they qualify, and then they pre-approve and then reach out. And only when the person is interested do they transfer the money after asking a couple more questions. This entire model goes for a toss because of the fact that they will no longer be able to collect or be able to process the data without a cognizant okay of the person whose data it belongs to. Now, this results into a fundamental shift for that specific ecosystem. in that same format, this is going to be holding true across any kind of an alternate industry, right? Whether it be corporates, whether any kind of a sales or marketing or specifically analytics companies that are using personal data from a targeting element. So these guys would definitely be the most hit. One of the few things that I would say that is personally I found lacking in the bill was the clarity on what is identifiable as PII data.
Exactly.
Because they have intentionally framed it in a vague manner in order to be able to always encompass the maximum amount of PII data that could actually be incorporated from a protection standpoint. Data localization is a no-brainer. That should have had happened, in fact, many years ago. I'm glad that it's happening today. But yeah, I would say this bill, irrespective of the intention, is going to genuinely shift the way businesses are conducted today across the spectrum. And I would say, yeah, definitely frauds may be on the rise basis this, if the government doesn't provide a supporting infrastructure, which it luckily has already started work on, right? Whether it be NBFC, AA, and so on and so forth. While having said that, that still would encompass slowly I would say, more of an urban and educated population in the starting years of it. But as time goes by and as privacy becomes more and more of a right that people know that they have, this will translate into an overall ecosystem change itself, the way business is done today. That's at least my perspective.
Sure. And I think, this conversation will be incomplete without, we addressing Ocean as a protocol coming in, and a lot of people talking around Ocean and the new opportunity it will bring. So, either of you, we can set the context, what Ocean looks like and how we are looking as a country when we talk about this protocol. Open
Sure.
credit enablement network impact, just for the readers to understand. Yeah.
So, Ocean, if I have to give a very layman's term to it, it's basically making anyone into a paisa bazaar, right? That essentially anyone who owns any kind of a merchant or the end customer can now upsell effectively by giving loans without having to go through the entire shebang of operations of building, integrating, approaching different kind of institutions in order to be able to build a separate BRE. Of course, one of the few things that will be interesting to see how this evolves is that how they are going to account for specific user behavior where there is not too much data that is available as well, right? One of the more prominent examples, for example, in the media is about Lenskart. Now, of course, they do own, say, X million of customers who they have a direct contact with, and all it takes for is a push notification on saying that, okay, hey, now you can apply for a loan here. But effectively, what this will be doing is encroaching into whatever are the other aggregator models that are currently available today for availability of credit. So at a larger scheme of things, Ocean is essentially going to ensure that credit penetration across the country happens in a much more structured manner, as well as keeping in mind the entire AA along with the complete data privacy bill stitching with it, as you correctly pointed out a few minutes ago. So I would say, yeah, this is definitely going to increase the amount of appetite that financial institution would have had overall lending blindly or trusting their partners along the side, because for them it becomes great channel sourcing avenues as well, and of course for businesses to monetize consecutively.
Sure. So that you have a point on Ocean?
No, of course. See, Ocean, anything. I think the standard thing is whatever Nandan Nilekani sets his mind to and end up doing will have broader ramifications, and the entire industries are going to be created out of those particular actions as well. And I do believe that Ocean also will actually create that. So the number of business models that we built upon Ocean as of now going to be tremendous, and the credit penetration that we're actually going to see happening through Ocean is actually going to fuel the entire next wave of lending that we're going to see. Because India's SME lending penetration, I think, is about 11 or 12% overall. And along with this, and as we see the rise of the MSME fund announced as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat stimulus package by the government, along with Ocean, we do actually see that SMEs will actually finally, hopefully, get access to the credit that they actually require as of now. But the key during this entire thing is actually going to be implementation. Banks still bear the same scars of NPAs that they did previously. It's going to be very hard for them to actually trust and to actually leave their entire underwriting to this particular engine. Because see, banking is one of the few things, fintech, especially if you actually look at it, fintech finance is a very important part of the tech. What we've actually seen happen with startups, especially, everyone looks at the tech part of fintech and they actually ignore the finance part. Which is why I've seen even some of the startup NBFCs, unfortunately, their NPAs actually end up rising to a very large extent because all these are technology solutions for what is fundamentally a human behavioral problem. So with Ocean, what I do see emerging is the fact that the access to data is going to be equal to all. The access to data is going to be equal to all. It's going to be a level playing field that's going to be created for everyone. So the incumbents and the challengers are going to have access to the same ocean of information. What they build on top of that, how do they target their customers on top of that? How can they iterate and how can they actually scale that up over time? It's actually going to determine success when it comes to this particular protocol as well. And along with this, what's going to be most important, Vaibhav, is the fact that the regulations that are actually going to be created around this should actually create very large barriers to entry for people to actually come in, so they essentially ends up getting captured by a very small number of people. It should be democratized. It should be open to a larger number of people to actually transact, because the potential of this is so huge. We can't actually end up having this monopolized by a small number of players. We will actually need market forces to come into the picture over here to make sure this can actually become a success.
Sure, and let's take another 5-10 minutes and talk about few trends which we are seeing, which we can see in the future. So, for example, we are seeing a lot of startups coming around sachetization of financial services or loans, right? And then we are seeing a lot of Geo Money coming in, Geo Money Impact coming in, and startups building towards that. Similarly, loan recovery is a different branch which is coming out, and a lot of startups are building in that area. So what you guys are seeing in the market in terms of opportunities where new startups are building or can build, and where we can create a substantial impact and change, and and it's open to all, and you guys can jump in.
So definitely, like I mentioned, things which, for example, anything to do with customer acquisition. So we are seeing 4 key themes, which we believe are relevant to the market across India. One is cost and resource optimization. Any technologies which can help in those areas, right? Because the market is going to be tight for a period of time. So cost and resource optimization becomes very important. Employee empowerment becomes very important. Employee productivity, effectiveness, how to enable that becomes very important. In our terms, in Microsoft, the way we look at it, the application side of things, application modernization, data center modernization, those are things which fall into this theme of cost and resource optimization, very crucial. The second biggest theme we see, is revenue generation. Right, it's crucial for everybody. Every customer, SME, enterprise, any of them are actually looking at avenues of how do we create new revenue streams. Are the traditional revenue streams going to change? How will digital, for example, infuse and create revenue streams for them? How can you use AI, ML in a bigger measure? We're seeing a lot of that happening actually. To again create new products and services for revenue streams. Two overriding themes: cost and revenue optimization, revenue generation, and of course, if you are in the FSI, risk and compliance management and security. So anything around that, we have a bunch of our fintech partners whom we work with. We're incubating as well and bringing up and creating ecosystems along with the larger banks to actually talk to those teams, come out with solutions around that.
Sure. And so that I'm sure you might have seen too many pitch decks in past 3-4 months on fintech itself. So and then your team. So what are the new emerging trends, and what do you think is lacking? Where startups are still not focusing, and there's a clear-cut impact area they can build upon?
So see, I think so. One of the key areas that people actually are differentiating into, when they think of fintech, everyone thinks of either lending, they think of payments, and then they think of insurance. Right? These are the 3 broad trends that we actually emerge in fintech throughout. Now, quite frankly, we actually look at that, and of course the securities market, helping people actually transact online, buy mutual funds, buy stocks, etc. But fintech is actually so much more than that. As Vijay also mentioned, one sector has been historically ignored for a long period of time is actually with regard to regulation tech, as well as risk assessment and risk management. Those risk management protocols on the personal side as well as on the business side are actually sorely lacking. We still have the tools and the players actually emerge are actually very, very small. So that, and along with the increase in credit, there's also going to be an increase in risk. And this is somewhere where Gaurav and Kaza is actually, I do believe that I'd love to hear from you as to what you guys are also planning on this particular space as well. Now, number 2, as you mentioned, along with the sachetization of loans, what people are looking for more importantly is actually more bespoke and personal products. Now, see, the thing is, there are more or less, everyone talks about personal products and everything coming in. Most of those products actually fail to understand what my needs are. They sort of bucket me. Their personalization is, okay, if this guy is offering you 5 products, I'll offer you 15 products. It's the same 5 products with like 15 different names essentially and slight tweaks to iterations. What is a deeper degree of personalization that I can actually get to this, that actually understands my transaction history, understands my credit profile, understands the profiles that I actually have in my various avatars as well, and puts all that together. Number 3, which you also hopefully see actually emerge when it comes to this, besides the insurance penetration and everything, it's especially with regard to the employees at the company. Now, see, employees of a company actually become one of the richest, actually become the easiest markets for you to actually tap into. The way they actually tap into this, most people traditionally say, if I'm a lending product, I just go to the HR department or the finance department and say, why don't you send out an email blaster to all your particular people to make sure I actually get on board as part of that, right? What is the level of bespokeness that actually comes into it? Can I actually ensure that I'm an employee of this particular organization? Can that organization actually negotiate with the credit providers and the fintech companies to make sure there are products that are actually tailored to this, and there's a clear handoff that also happens as part of that? What are the bouquet of opportunities that do arise over there as well? Lastly, which I do think is going to be important for India to understand as well, is actually to see what are the applications of blockchain that are actually going to come into this. Let's see, the blockchain, nobody say blockchain in India, people think of crypto, they talk about the Supreme Court judgment, and then that basically the entire debate gets monopolized by that, right? But what we've seen happen, China has actually launched its own cryptocurrency, I would say, currency on the blockchain. JP Morgan's done something similar over there. Now we have SBI. SBI is one of the only banks in the country to actually articulate this particular proposition, but we haven't heard back from them after that. What Aadhaar has actually done, what UPI has done, if you can actually merge that onto blockchain itself and actually take care of a number of these particular aspects, while reducing the lead time on this particular thing and reduce amount of data consumption that happens, that in turn can actually solve a number of the issues that people are actually looking at. But no one's actually looking at the application of blockchain in these particular protocols. Everyone says, look, they have Bitcoin over there. I'll create my own version of Bitcoin. And let me see if we can actually obviate the RBI by setting up in Singapore and trying to get people this way and all that. Those are not the kind of things that actually work. India, and the thing is, see, even when it comes to farm credit, for example, another important thing to also know, the fact that everyone talks about lending, no one's actually spoken to lending to farmers. That's traditionally only been the domain of PSUs and the cooperative banks, right? But they actually solved the issue of land identification and making sure those assets can actually be collateralized by those particular farmers and actually helping them get access to proper credit, get them access to market. That's an entirely new area that happens. So like this, there are multiple new areas that are also coming in as of now. All it's going to take is, see, the best way to actually put this, to actually summarize it, to say that as long as you don't have any equivalent to what you do in the market, that's an entirely new market, and that's what investors actually want to look at. Investors don't want you to be the X of Y or the A of B. They want it to be something unique unto yourself that becomes easier for them to understand, and that becomes an entire new white space that people can actually go and people can actually populate thereafter.
Gaurav, Siddharth has raised $100 million fund, and I know you're not raising money, but this is the time. So jokes apart, but yeah, how are you looking at the regulatory and the recovery? Because you are in a very different spot, right? Recovery, loan recovery, and regulation and compliance and fraud detection is the extension. It's upcoming domain altogether. Of course, we have seen bunch of startups, bunch of companies, but we have always looked upon them as someone alien who knows something more. But that's it. What do you think the new with the whole new fintech coming in? How will this particular domain pace up, and how will the startups in this particular domain pace up?
Sure. So see, I think so there are two elements, right? For us as a B2B company who are providing, say, fraud detection or essentially data digestion solutions, right? One thing that is going to be imperative forward-looking wise is how can we essentially draw patterns, draw analytics without using any PII data. So for example, essentially building in SDK-based modules that reside on your mobile phone without sending any data back to your servers in order to be able to simply give me a score back based on what is already on that client's premise, to be able to churn banking data literally then and there and without actually it coming back to the server. Now, this is from a forward-looking perspective. I would say, so one of the few things that Siddharth also highlighted rightfully, right, is that a very large chunk of businesses are going to essentially have to relook at their core strategies by which they are currently doing business. There are two models. There is your sustainable model and there is your quick fly-by-night kind of models wherein you're making a quick buck using, say, open data or providing a Me-Too product and essentially scaling up in that specific category. For us, our core philosophy had always been that jack of all, master of none, and that is something that has really worked well for us. But at the same time, I would say the system is evolving at a very, very rapid pace. There is always going to be catch up between technology to regulation and regulation to technology, depending upon who is greater at that moment in time. And I think to a very large degree, startups overall in India have been quite flexible in order to be able to adopt to those changes. Not at the pace at which I have seen even banks probably still still being able to manage to cope up. There are obviously regulations that literally affect their daily jobs, right? For example, there was an RBI regulation that essentially mandates that, now you cannot have multiple current accounts to do business. This ties up extremely well with, say, for example, the cash flow based lending piece, the early warning signals of the RBI, and so on and so forth. So it's all falling into place. Rome was never built in a day, and that is something that you are now seeing happen. I would say at ground levels across the overall Indian ecosystem, as at a regulation level, technology level, as well as I would say at a grassroots level, whether it be farmer loans or a large wholesale loan. There is true innovation happening there. It's just that it reaches to that specific point slightly slower than we would want it to be.
And Dina, on the closing note, especially in SME lending overall, there's so much happening. So many startups trying to lend to SMEs, trying to recover that money. What do you think are the gaps where few startups can focus on in SME lending overall, where clearly white space is visible?
See, particularly from a white space perspective, in the SME is still on the data part of it and the credit decisioning, I would say. So that's the part wherein data aggregation is one part we need to focus on, how we can leverage the existing infrastructure, multiple places where it is scattered. Today we have a beautiful GST system running, the tax systems running, and there are pipes which can rails through which we can get access to that. And then we have the other part of it, which is also the banking and the payments part of it. On the digitization front, how we can put all of this together and have a single assessment of an entity in terms of what they do. So that how to solve for this entire, which also goes back to the ocean part of it as well, right? How to put it together and then have a very intelligent and informative way of taking a decision rather than relying entirely on history is something which the startups need to, or rather, we as a ecosystem needs to evolve into to solve this credit. So it is more bold bets based on data and data patterns.
And just Vijayant, on the closing notes, we have been talking about data from past 1 hour on and off, right? How do you think Microsoft's role evolving? And I wouldn't want to call it particularly in Jio's context, but of course, you guys are doing some major amazing partnerships, and a lot of startups can leverage not only your cloud, but bunch of other technologies you offer out there. So how do you think this whole AI, ML, data localization, aggregation, coming as modules where startups can plug and play from a Microsoft perspective in going forward in the future?
For us, it's huge in terms of the focus which we have on data. So data is at the core of it in any case. So if you look at our technologies from Azure for AI, ML, or even the work we are doing currently for local language support, the NLP work, etc. So these tools are there, they're available there, and the partnership with people like Jio is just to give that a massive scale, right? And to take it to the SME and give it a much broader coverage than what it would get. So I mean, for us, the work, for example, we're doing with very, very large NBFCs or even banks, etc., on data lakes, data warehouse, and the intelligence we're getting out of it is just giving us the next step to create even better products and better tools and technologies, around data. So data, it's sort of a mechanism or an organism. It grows on its own, one on top of the other. And we are just spreading it out right now. So some of these strategic partnerships are essentially designed so we can have a bigger footprint and we have a better way of getting more data as well as technologies around data to a broader audience, including SMEs. So that's the outlook on Microsoft.
Sure. I think we touched upon all the points. So I think thanks for all your time. Thank you guys for joining in, and stay tuned for more.